Welcome to Think Free with Stephen
and Daniel.
Two brothers breaking down ideas and ways of thinking about this thing we call life. Unlock your mind to explore more than you ever thought possible. Think Free. Should we talk about some gun control stuff then?
Yeah.
What was your first reaction when I mentioned that? Were there any ideas or thoughts that came into your head?
Just thought, oh boy, this is a can of worms, man. Yeah.
That's what we like.
Yeah.
It kind of seemed like maybe best to do it when there isn't something in the news, blown up the news, at least right now.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you just talk about the ways that we talk about it. I was actually listening to a book that was using this topic as one for different sides to come together and find new ways to discuss polarizing topics. So I thought that's what we like to do. So maybe we can
There you go.
peel apart some of the rhetoric and get below the surface. So
Yeah, it's definitely one of the probably top 3 topics. Seems like for the people have very strong opinions on.
yeah.
And like you said, it's quite polarizing for a lot of people.
Well, it prompted me to think about, kind of go the next level on that, because of what we know about, the way humans respond to things is usually emotions are much more compelling than just logic or thought or reason. And so I started thinking about the emotions at play and then what's in common for both sides. And I would say probably the number one desire, the number one reason for anybody to be pro-gun or anti-gun, if we're going to make it that simple, would be just because they want to feel safe, would be the main reason for most folks. There's other reasons, I'm sure. And they just have a disagreement on how they can feel the most safe. So obviously a pro-gun advocate wants to feel safe from intruders or from people that, break into your house, or the government if they ever mount an attack, and people on the other side that want to have more regulations, restrict guns completely, just want to feel safe that their kids aren't going to be attacked in school, or they're not going to be attacked in public, or somebody walking into a deli with a revolver strapped to his hip isn't going to do something stupid. So It's like at the end of the day, I think all sides want to feel safe, and wherever they are, however they're living, and they just see different ways of accomplishing that. So jumping right into the deep stuff, that to me, that seems like any conversation about it, if the two sides that are arguing or two people that are trying to debate could understand that, or at least have that conversation with each other, what motivates you from a feeling level to want to have guns be more available or keep the same level of availability, and what motivates you to want to restrict gun use or eliminate gun ownership, private gun ownership altogether. Seems like if there was a mutual understanding of the feelings, emotions, fears around that would at least humanize both sides. So what do you think?
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of it from the American gun-owning, pro-gun side of it. I'm wondering how much the freedom and actual amendment and law of the land plays into it as well, on top of the safety portion of it.
I think that's a factor. Yeah, I think that's why it's a uniquely, well, some people will say a uniquely American problem.
Right.
Not just the damage that's caused, but the resistance to doing something different. The guns sort of stereotype that there's that somewhat uniquely American addiction or compulsion or entitlement to owning guns. I don't know that you see that in many other parts of the world.
Right. Well, I guess that's what I'm getting at, is challenging maybe the premise that it's the core deep level discussion is not just based around feeling safe.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people would have a strong opinion about pro guns that don't keep it for home intrusion, don't have a gun that they carry concealed, but maybe it's for sport or for hunting.
Yeah, I think that would represent the other group. Yeah, my hunch is that that's a small minority. Would you think it'd be a bigger faction? I mean, obviously we're just guessing here, but do you think there's a significant amount of people that want their guns for sport and hunting? I've gotten the sense that that's just a fringe amount, and that's often used as a way to not have to face the emotions, maybe, which is kind of a judgment on my part, I guess, for somebody to say they want it for sport or hunting and self-protection. But to emphasize the other two things seems more manly or less fear-based or something like that.
I don't know.
Yeah, just speculation, I guess.
Yeah. No, I'm just trying to think of, like, if you the fear-based, like, protection, being wanting to be safe. If it's in a gun cabinet, locked up, not loaded, not readily accessible, and you don't carry it on you when you go out, then the real safety that it would provide, if you were to be honest with yourself, would be like a zombie apocalypse or like the aftermath of World War III or something like that, maybe, but it wouldn't be like an emergency safety type of a situation, which I think you'd have a large amount of people that are pro-gun for the emergency safety situation. They've got a shotgun by their bed or a shotgun underneath their bed, or, a pistol on their hip or something in their purse. Right.
Yeah, because then that would be almost two different discussions, I would think, if you're advocating to defend the right of gun ownership for personal safety and protection. That would maybe be a different argument and a different set of conclusions or solutions that you'd want, versus if you literally only wanted a gun for sport and or hunting, and you had no intention of ever shooting another person, no matter how bad things got. It was only for, putting meat on the table, and you'd only pull it out with a well-intentioned plan to go out and do that. I could almost see two different arguments, or two different, because then you wouldn't care about high-capacity magazine restrictions. You wouldn't care about, silencers or suppressors. You wouldn't care about a lot of the things that become topics of dissent, or
except for the slippery slope
argument, right? That once they start getting control over that,
right,
which is, I did a little bit of looking at what laws are on the books right now, and there are a lot already that we have things that are banned. It turns out that during Prohibition was when we have, in the U.S. at least, some of the first serious gun restrictions actually get put on the books, because organized crime really took off during Prohibition.
Thanks a lot, Capone.
Yeah, exactly. And then so before that time, you could own a submachine gun as a private citizen and, have 100 round magazine or whatever. And so they came in and were like, okay, all the things the gangsters are using to mow down entire opposing rival gangs, like those are off limits now. Certain ordinances and, explosives and rocket launchers and that sort of stuff. So it literally went from the wild, wild west, where anybody could own anything, to Prohibition came in, and too many people were getting killed over alcohol, lack of alcohol, or the hoarding of alcohol. And so they put some restrictions in. And so then there's been, the slope has gotten a little bit slippery since then. If there's been, I don't know, off the top of my head, a handful of other major acts over the last 100 years that have come in and further restricted other things, ways that people can and can't use guns, what types of guns, that there have to be registered. You can't produce, trade, or sell a gun that has less than 3.7 ounces of metal in it, I think was one that I saw, which I think is because it could evade metal detection.
And that's like a national policy?
Yeah, these are all federal
laws. Okay.
Right. Which, of course, are the kind of the baseline, and then states can impose, further things over it. which I was curious what your thoughts were about the relationship to the relationship of rules limiting the use of guns and how that actually affects whether they're abused or not. Yeah. Do we actually get a tangible result? Which I know we kind of got off the slippery slope topic, so maybe if that ties in somehow, but has it been a good slippery slope?
Well, I think that subject is really interesting to even look at, because I think that can be used as an argument for pro-gun owners to say, oh, look how many restrictions have happened in the last 30 years, and yet we still are having these mass shootings, and we have a lot of illegal things that are happening with firearms, even though we're having those restrictions don't work. So we don't need those. We don't need more restrictions. Yeah. To be able to do it. And I think the reason why I think it's really interesting is because at the same time, we do have restrictions, and we do have a ton of the definition of mass shootings. We're having mass shootings constantly, almost every single day. And we're like, by far, the only civilized country in the entire world to be having those, and even close to the rate that we are having them. And so it's challenging to try to think that there's not something going there. There's not some type of problem in the United States when it talks about the safety around guns.
Right. And in the little bit of reading I was doing, I saw one place that defined a mass shooting as 4 more people killed in a single incident. Is that your understanding too?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and you
I couldn't remember if it was 3 or 4, so that's why I didn't say anything.
Yeah, 4 is what I saw.
And it's like not including the shooter or something like that. It's like 4 not including the perpetrator.
Because very often they end up committing suicide.
Yeah.
Part
so
of it,
it's like they have to
4 victims.
do it somewhere. Yeah. So if it's just 3 and then them, it's not a mass shooting or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you bring up a great point in the sense that there is something going on. And I think that's a great thing to acknowledge when we're having this conversation, regardless of which side that we're on, that there is something unique about America. And then I think it's also helpful not to assume or jump to conclusions or feel like you as the person arguing has the answer as to why that is.
Right.
Because there are so many factors that are at play that are different than other countries we've already kind of alluded to. And the statistics are really hard to work with. There was a website that I found that showed the different states, and it ranked all 50 states by how strict their laws are, over and on top of the federal laws, the states that have put in extra measures to restrict, and then the amount of gun deaths per, 1,000 people or whatever metric they used, so adjusted for population. And they were able to make the case that by and large, there's a few outliers that don't quite fit into the graph perfectly, but by and large, states with more stricter gun laws have less gun deaths per capita than those with very lenient gun laws have a lot more deaths.
And just to clarify, gun deaths, not mass shootings.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So even suicides is counted in this statistic. And so, as we know from statistical analysis, correlation is easy to spot. Causation is very difficult to prove. And so, a simple counter argument to that could be, the people in these states with the very low gun laws also are more depressed or more angry or have a different set of morals. And so they're more likely to, shoot themselves or shoot other people or
less educated.
Less educated, exactly. There are plenty of other reasons that you could cite for it. It doesn't mean that the statistics don't prove a point. It just isn't conclusive that it's a causation, that more laws equal less deaths. The statistics show a relationship there. And so it doesn't dismiss that possibility, but it also doesn't make it a hard and fast, you're an idiot if you don't believe it. It's one, I think it's one piece of the puzzle from where I stand. Speaking of statistics, there's one that I found that thought made an interesting point depending on how we split it up or how we looked at it. And it takes a survey of 7 different countries, and it gives us 2 different numbers for each of those 7 different countries. The 2 numbers it gives us are the number of civilian-owned guns per 100 people in 2017, and then it contrasts that to the gun homicides per 100,000 people in 2019, so
Okay.
2 years later.
So 100 people and then
Versus 100,000. Yeah. And it just says gun homicides, so I would expect that does not include suicides, although I'm not sure. One of the difficulties of having these discussions is knowing what kind of statistics we're talking about.
Yeah.
Whether it's, I would expect it doesn't include suicides, but does include mass shootings. And if we just looked at mass shootings, we might have different numbers here,
Yeah.
different ratios. So,
In comparing other countries.
right, exactly. Who maybe have a lot less mass shootings, but still have these homicide numbers still mean something. So, so we're looking at a very specific set of statistics that tell a very specific story. And then I dug a little bit deeper, and to me, there seems like there's another story that we could extrapolate from this as well.
Okay. Because it shows right now that the U.S. is quite a bit higher on homicides than everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. So at first glance, the United States, as most of us know, the United States far outstrips everybody when it comes to civilian guns owned per person. But we also have the highest rate of gun homicides per 100,000 people as well, by quite a bit. And so a lot of people have made, again, a causation or at least a very strong correlation between those 2 numbers, and have concluded that in order to get our gun homicides down, we need to reduce the number of guns per person owned, right? That's kind of one of the talking points out there.
And so just to clarify, regardless of anything else, per 100,000 people, we have more homicides per 100,000 people than
Yes.
these other countries.
Right.
Okay. And then we're looking at the other graph, and you could quickly go, since they're right next to each other, to say, oh, it's because they also have way more guns per civilian.
Per person, exactly.
Yeah, per person.
Yeah, and so that's that thing that's easy to correlate and make a conclusion of. However, I don't think it's quite as cut and dry.
Okay.
And because they picked 6 other countries, Canada, Australia, Norway, Israel, United Kingdom, and Japan, to kind of show a spectrum here. Canada, by comparison, instead of having 4.12 gun homicides per 100,000 people in 2019, they had half of a percent, or 0.5. So half of that, half of a percent. No, it's not half a percent.
Half of an occurrence.
Half of an occurrence, yes.
Yeah.
So it only, it took 200,000 people to have one gun homicide. Yeah.
Okay.
And then their gun ownership is much lower than ours per 100 people. It's only 34 instead of 120. Whew. So right off the bat, you can see a dramatically lower homicide rate and a dramatically lower rate of number of guns per person owned.
Okay.
Australia is even lower on both of those accounts. They only have 30 per 100 people as far as guns owned, and then they had 0.18 gun homicides per 100,000 people. Norway had 0.07 gun homicides per 100,000 people, so that's a pretty good number. And they own roughly 29 guns per person, per 100 people, 29 per 100 people. And so Israel was another one that was mentioned. It's 6.7 guns owned per 100 people, and their gun homicide rate's a little bit higher at 1.05. The United Kingdom, 4.6 guns owned per 100 people, and a 0.04 on the gun homicides per 100,000 people. Japan came at the lowest in both categories. Japan has 0.3 guns owned per 100 people. So basically it takes 300 people to get one gun.
Wow.
Yeah. And then their gun homicide rate per 100,000 people is 0.02. So the lowest number there. So a quick glance at this, it seems pretty straightforward. If we had less guns, we'd have less homicides. However, if we look at ratios, which I did, of the how many guns owned does it take to cause one homicide, in these countries, the numbers come out a little bit differently. So for these using these same statistics, in the U.S., for every 29 guns that are owned, there's one homicide. In Canada, which had some better numbers, for every 69 guns owned, there's one homicide. In Australia, for every 166 guns owned, there's one homicide. Norway, it takes 411 guns to get one homicide. In Israel, it takes 6 guns owned to get to one homicide. The United Kingdom, for every 115 guns owned, there's one homicide. And in Japan, for every 15 guns owned, there's one homicide. Tracking with all that? Yeah. So
Per 100,000.
right. And then we go back out to per 100,000 people. So all in all, if more guns meant more deaths, then we would expect to see that it would take, by and large, those countries that had alarming numbers on the front end would also show us that they had lots of guns and lots of deaths related to each other. But it's just not true. To the two biggest, to compare the U.S. to the biggest outlier, for every 29 guns owned, we have one death. And in Norway, for every 411 guns owned, they have one death. So more guns does not necessarily equal more deaths, is the point that I think can be inferred from this, because we don't see that the ratios line up with the way that the graph originally expresses itself.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Click it. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening, it's a little hard without the numbers in front of you, so I apologize. If you can't quite get your brain wrapped around it, I know visuals help a lot. Hopefully that you can understand that the point we're making here is not that there's any kind of conclusion to be drawn, other than statistics can be messy at best, or difficult to ascertain clear causation, a relationship between the two. So if you want to make the case that if we had less guns in America, we would have less homicides, that may happen. But there doesn't seem to be data from other countries to support that.
Right. Because when we take a look at, and I think like we said, the graph is if you don't dig into it, it can be deceiving, because one statistic is talking about out of 100 people, and the other statistic is talking about out of 100,000 people.
Right.
And even though the 100,000 people of the actual homicides occurring, our bar graph for America is quite a bit larger.
Yes.
It is not, it's not as large or larger than how big our graph is than everybody else on the gun ownership side.
Right. From ratios.
Yeah, we should have, if that was to be true, that more guns equal more deaths, we should have had more deaths in that $100,000 or 100,000 person category.
Right. To line up with the extraordinarily high number of guns we have compared to the other countries.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so nobody's debating that the United States leads the world in gun homicides per capita.
Or leads in gun ownership.
Or gun ownership per capita. It's just, what does that relationship actually mean that we're calling into question here?
Right.
And is the solution to getting, because everybody wants the homicides to go down, like either side of the debate. I think everybody wants the homicides to go down. Everybody wants less mass shootings or zero, school shootings, all that. Everybody wants that. It's just, how do we get there, and what steps are going to actually lead us there, where the debate comes in. And so I think this calls into question that just reducing the number of guns is going to make the number of homicides go down. I don't know if it would or wouldn't, but I'm not convinced that it would. And so I think we would need to have some different statistics brought to bear, or we'd need to have a different discussion, or we'd need other things to happen besides just reducing the amount of guns.
Right. Because with doing the ratio, it also does not prove is that simply that it wouldn't work.
Right. Exactly.
By doing it. So because each area and each situation and country is specifically different and unique in itself.
Yes. Yeah.
And what's going on in it. So yeah, absolutely. And I think it seems like the big push from the pro-gun movement is the solution is around the mental well-being,
mental health,
the mental health of Americans, and it does seem like a large push from the from people on the other side is more restrictive access to guns, or complete flat out just less guns
Right.
in circulation and it seems like that's really at the crux of it, that those are really the only two
Yeah.
solutions that have potentially been proposed as far as getting any traction.
Yeah, and the other side doesn't believe the other side's solutions are going to do any good, so we don't get anywhere for the most part, because there isn't buy-in, there isn't compromise, there isn't, acknowledgement, all of those things that are missing when you're trying to work through a complicated solution.
Yeah. And then I think you try to work through what ability the government has to solve it. And then it gets into reading the Constitution and the Second Amendment. How does that actually play? What did that actually mean? Is it relative now with, semi-automatic rifles that shoot very fast and have a lot of magazines?
Yeah.
All those types of things. Then it gets even messier to try to come up with a solution for it as well.
Yeah, and no surprise, you would probably, as people self-selected into pro-gun or anti-gun camps, those same camps and those same people would probably be pro-government and anti-government, only reversed. So that doesn't help the discussion, because you're already starting off from a point of disagreement about how much the government should be involved in the first place.
Exactly.
Much less whether they should have a hand in the gun control.
Right. And exactly. And especially too, I think when the Constitution was primarily written to limit the reach of the government.
Right.
And so to put kind of guardrails in there.
Exactly.
And so when there is a guardrail there and one side is talking about removing that and giving more power to the government, it's the exact thing that the pro-gun movement and those people that want less government control don't want.
Yeah, it strikes at another core value beyond their right to gun ownership, is the right to not have those rights infringed by the government. Yeah, which is another debate and another place that people are going to see differently on and may find irreconcilable differences when it comes to, is the Constitution a living document? Can it be amended? Should it be amended? Should it be adjusted to fit our times? Or should we stick as close to the original intention as how we see it as possible?
Right.
Which can get somewhat subjective too. So I think that would be what you brought up as another great point. If you are in a discussion with somebody that sees the gun control debate from the other side as you, to just have that be part of the conversation. Well, how much should the government be involved in our daily lives, whether it's, our healthcare decisions, our reproductive rights, our, gender affirming identity or not? These are all sort of gray areas, by and large, of how much control the government should have and how much it should stay out and let people make their own decisions. And if we're talking about guns, but what we're really talking about is how much control the government should have, but we don't acknowledge that, then we're not going to get very far in either category.
Yeah.
So it's another good thing to watch for and to bring up if possible.
Yeah, and not even just not getting you're not getting far in both understanding the other person and also coming to especially people that have the power and ability to a resolution and a solution to, like we kind of said, everybody wants less homicides, less mass shootings, less school shootings.
Yeah, and I believe the vast majority of gun control advocates don't want all guns to disappear. They just want the ones that are used to harm others, by and large, to be illegal, to be limited, to have severe restrictions put in place. And by and large, gun rights advocates don't want submachine guns just out on the streets for people to buy at Walmart and those sort of things. So I believe most people involved in the debate have more or less reasonable expectations. However, like a lot of things, they feel like if they only advocate for the reasonable solutions, they're going to lose. They're going to get less. And so they often have to advocate for more, stricter, higher, stronger versions of what they'd be content with, thinking that then they'll settle close to what they can live with. And what ends up happening is both push for things that are unrealistic, and so no compromise and no reasonable solutions come up. The pro-gun folks might say, well, zero restrictions, zero background checks, zero any of this. I don't want any, because slippery slope. And once you come for my suppressor and my bump stock, then you're going to come for, anything else that I want to be able to keep. And obviously the other side would say, well, if we don't push hard for this and we let you have anything you want, then it's going to get out of control in the other direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important too. The fact of saying kind of the slippery slope, and also the don't want to give a little bit that you were just talking about, because it's like, you think about it, something simple like even certain states restricted how large a magazine can be for it. Like you can't have more than 5. If there was a guarantee that it wasn't ever going to go less than that, there wasn't going to be any more restrictions, but it was also going to bring down the amount of homicides and mass shootings that would happen,
right,
probably would get a lot of gun owners that would be okay with that.
Right.
But that slippery slope and the not wanting to give up anything for this and wanting to gain something on their side of it, it makes that a challenge as well,
Yeah, it does. It makes it hard to feel like if I give this up, it's actually going to have meaningful or measurable results out in the real world. If you pulled somebody and said, if you could save 50 children this year from needless deaths at the hand of, irresponsible gun owners by adopting this new restriction, would you do it? I think a lot of people would seriously consider that,
right,
if they knew unequivocally that it could. I think for the most part, though, most people don't believe that,
right,
don't think it will. There's plenty of other things they can blame. Mental health. They can say, well, criminals are always going to get guns and they're always going to get high capacity magazines no matter what laws we pass. That's been done before. We try to outlaw drugs, and look at that's done. It doesn't keep people from using drugs. It just criminalizing the act has had very little effect on discouraging the use of it. On the other hand, there's a lot less people getting mowed down by machine guns and rocket launchers.
Right.
Because we outlawed those.
Right.
So there are results we can point to. I've heard places like Chicago, which has one of the highest, as a city, if not the highest amount of regulations and bans on weapons, and also a very, very high rate of murder and injury caused by guns, the very guns that are outlawed. And that can often be pointed to as an example of, guns don't work, or gun restrictions, gun laws don't work, because in a place where they're highly restricted, still a lot of abuse happens. And one of the more common counter arguments to that is, well, they're brought in from states nearby that don't have as restrictive of laws, and they would be sold there, but they can't be, so they go outside, or people come in and elements bring them into it. And that highlights the complication of, just like with the abortion laws now being put back to the states, of 50 states, which are almost like 50 little countries, all trying to work together with shared borders, and in some places, not very far to travel from one state to the next, if you're on the border, of course. To have any kind of effective, not only consistent rules, but to be able to measure the impact of those rules. You're not in a vacuum. You're not isolated. Just like Chicago can't be a good test subject for, do gun laws really help? Because they can't keep the guns from coming in from other places where they're not doing the same experiment.
Yeah, they don't have a 50-foot wall or concrete or whatever around the city
can restrict or limit people from legally purchasing them in the next state over and then bringing them in and causing harm with them. And so just because the event happens in Chicago, where that's, a highly restrictive gun zone, doesn't prove one thing one way or the other. It doesn't say gun laws don't work, and it doesn't say that they do. Unfortunately, we don't get to, we'll get to see the results of that experiment. So, yeah, it's complicated in a place like the U.S., just like a lot of social issues are. Yeah, different states
and a huge landmass.
Right.
Huge.
Yeah. Compared to Norway or Israel or
England,
the UK.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Canada and Australia are up there, but
yeah,
if we're looking at some of these countries we were talking about, but yeah. What else do you see? Anything that we haven't talked about yet in the debate? Any talking points that kind of come up and make you roll your eyes?
It's kind of in the last, 5 years, 6 years, it's kind of like almost trying to get anything else solved right now is just laughable for it to be anything productive in Congress because of how polarizing and things that each side have done. The fact that like right now, like we're real close to having to have an emergency vote on the speaker again for the third time in less than a year or whatever. Like, the fact that just one person initiating it and the second person seconding it then forces everybody to have to go and do a vote is just chaotic mess of people wanting to be able to get the microphone and riling up their base and then trying to get what they want from it. So you get things where they're trying to pass a bill for giving aid to Israel and Ukraine, and then they're also slipping in the TikTok sell-off and the same exact thing. So, and I know that happens throughout all of history, but it just seems like in the last 6 years that type of behavior has been happening a lot more. And so the other part I was going with that is saying that it seems like when there's not a very public mass shooting, the gun debate conversation is not very front and center and doesn't have a lot of attention to it. And then it gets a lot of attention to it, but they can't figure anything out because, kind of like we were saying before, nobody's going to give on anything unless they can get something.
Right.
So the one group is not going to say, yeah, we're going to vote and approve more restrictive background checks unless we get this other stuff for either my home state or for whatever my base wants or whatever. It's a completely different topic. And so we can't even just fix the problem or even try to fix the problem. So that's what I see is frustrating, that we go a while without thinking about it, talking about it, dealing with it. And it's just kind of like we're covering it, we're closing our eyes or putting our head in the sand or kicking it underneath the rug. And then something bad happens and it comes up and it's this big old argument and debate, but then we can't ever get anything pushed through and anything actually even done. And then it just gets kicked under the rug again.
Yep. Till the next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has that feeling of, from a politician standpoint, it's more advantageous for us not to solve this problem so that we can keep being relevant to try to fix the problem. Because if we fix it in other things, then we're not as relevant and we don't get as much maybe attention or reelection or have I'm going to fix this if you reelect me this time, kind of a thing. The other thing you often point me back to when we're having these kind of debates is, kind of like, where's the money coming from, or who's got a lot to lose if things change, the status quo changes. Obviously, in this debate, if we had more rules on the books, less guns available, more restrictions, gun ownership was discouraged, guns were confiscated, or we did buyback or something like that, there's a lot of money to be lost from the gun industry. NRA, all those, there's plenty of people like boogeymen that we can point to say they're in it for the money, they're in it for the power, they're in it for this, that, and the other thing. Do you see, is that one-sided, do you think, or on the gun restriction side of things, is there a money motive there? Is there any kind of incentive or power grab that some institution or some groups of people would stand to make money or something if we can restrict guns more so?
I think that's a good question. I don't think I've really thought about or seen something that's a glaring, like right on the top. Like I'm sure there could be underlying things where, okay, if that happens and then say the worst happens that the gun advocates are fearing and think will happen, then maybe there's like, oh, we'll need more police, or I don't know, we'll need something more here that we can put the funnel of the money into that we need for it. But, maybe like state by state, like if Washington was like, oh, we're going to do this extra background check, and oh yeah, it happens to be provided by this company who also happens to have donated to my campaign just recently or something like that.
Right.
I could see that for it. I think the gun and ammo manufacturers are definitely pushing for not having those.
Right. They would suffer if the status quo changes.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the other side though. There may be, it doesn't seem like there's an alternative that like somebody would buy what they would buy or what service that they would buy if they didn't have the gun. So I'm not sure from an actual like consumer standpoint, but like you'd need somebody to collect the guns, or you would need some way to dispose them or something like that. Maybe there could be some underlying premise for it.
Financial incentive.
Yeah.
It seems hard to think that would be a coordinated effort to change things for just those smaller things that you're talking about, which would also only be temporary.
Right.
But the long-term effects.
And it almost like it would need to be like a long-term plan of, this is a step to be able to get people to not be able to uprise or to be able to thwart the government. And so if they did this over the next 20 or 30 years, then they could get to that spot.
Yeah. Power. Yeah. Control.
Yeah. Which you don't really see, like, it hasn't happened in England.
Right.
Like it hasn't happened in
all these other places.
All these other civilized, countries in the last 20, 30, 40 years for it. But I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that brings up kind of my last thought for you on this was about the fact that for a lot of gun owners or gun rights advocates, protecting themselves from corrupt government, the U.S. government mostly, is a reason to keep guns and to keep lots of guns and to keep high capacity guns. And none of these people, have any intention of ever going out and committing, a mass shooting or crime or anything like that. However, they want to have an arsenal at home in case the government ever turns against them and they need to defend their property and their loved ones. I've heard other people say, that's ridiculous. Have you ever seen any of the amount of the U.S. military force that they can amass, the tanks, the Apache helicopters, the drones? Like, what's your, basement arsenal of AR-15s going to do against, if the government really wants to mess you up, there's no amount of guns you can stockpile to stop that. And I've heard that argument from people that have served in the military, that have seen behind the curtain a little bit, that have some reason to fear. And so their conclusion is like, you know what, we're subject to the federal government. If they want to come mess you up, it's happening. So pray and vote that it doesn't. Don't expect yourself to be able to defend yourself. Other people obviously have a much more independent sort of survivalist mentality and truly believe that at some point they very may likely have to keep themselves safe from a corrupt government that wants to seize their land or take over or put them in concentration camps or something like that. So do you see there's any value in that? Is it a fool's errand? Is there a reason?
It seems like the only use case scenario where that possibly could be advantageous would be in some after effect situation. So like some fallout situation where it's not the government coming in, taking your land by cheat or something like that. Like it's just more of a small militant groups around the area, or it's just kind of gone into anarchy.
Right.
Or like I said in the beginning, like after World War III, and it's just literally the fallout of that. And there's just kind of smaller groups like you see on movies of different
Roaming
factions.
bands and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
if that was a fear of someone's and that's why they were wanting to keep that arsenal, I think that has some merit, because I think you could definitely get to a spot where you could fend, you and your 4, 5, 6 kids could fend off a good amount of people from that. But yeah, if somebody in power of the in America was able to convince the military to do like what Hitler convinced his military to do, yeah, there's not a chance in heck that you'd be able to be able to stand up, do anything. There would be no use.
Right. I mean, even relatively recent events like Waco, Texas, and Ruby Ridge, and plenty of other places that were, not even the government going and intending to demolish people, but it just stuff happened and it went wrong, and the citizens had plenty of guns, but at the end of the day, it still went terrible for everybody.
Yeah, and those situations where the government was trying to extract things peacefully,
Right, exactly.
and well,
They didn't have
they just said,
intentions.
"Hey, get out of here,"
Right.
or else, then
That would
done.
have been very quick.
Right.
Very short documentary.
Right.
Yeah, and then back to Hitler. Some of the times the argument is, first they came for the guns, and then once there was an unarmed populace, now he could easily take over, and the jackboots could do their thing, and all the brown shirts and all that could easily take over because it was an unarmed populace. But I think the point you're making is, this is the freaking U.S. government, the most powerful nation that's ever existed when it comes to raw arms. They don't need to disarm us first if they want to do terrible things.
Yeah,
We're already outgunned.
exactly. And as technology continues to evolve, with the laws that are in place, we are kept farther and farther back from what the government is able to have for military power. So just like talking about, back in Revolutionary War times, you had the exact same firepower that the government had, the little farmer did. And so then even back in the late 1930s, same thing, like you didn't have the same, but you weren't as far off as we don't have drones that can fly hundreds of miles and bomb targets for it. Entire buildings for it. So we have a lot less access to what the government has access to. So
It's not a fair fight.
yeah, I don't have a fear of like I can see like maybe you would have this argument if you're over in maybe some of the Middle Eastern countries about like Ukraine. I'm sure there's probably a good amount of people that are happy that they had weapons because then they joined the military or they were standing up in some small town trying to stop some Russians coming in or whatever, a small battalion or whatever.
Yeah, it's difficult to extrapolate like that in that part of the world, in Germany and other places where the citizens have been able to withstand or not withstand based on their armaments. To compare that to the U.S. situation, it's not really apples to apples.
Right. And I heard some really smart people talking about just how unique of a position the United States is in, where we have had a coordinated effort over so many years that we only have 2 countries that are touching us, and they're some of our strongest allies that we've created over the number of years.
Right.
So there's never forever been a threat, or supposedly will be a threat, from Canada coming in and trying to grab some of our land, or Mexico trying to come in and grab some of the land.
Right.
And so we're in a very unique spot comparative to the whole rest of the world. I mean, obviously, except for like Australia or something like that, but literally everybody else is just touching tons of different countries within very close to them. And so there's a lot bigger of a threat. So again, going back to this, civilians in America, I don't think we're going to have that really ever have that possibility that we're going to
see.
need to stand
Yeah.
up against an invasion
Foreign-
from another foreign government. Yeah. The same way that it could be beneficial to have guns in some other countries
Yeah.
for that.
That threat would be completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're definitely not solving anything today.
Not today.
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
But hopefully this gives a little more food for thought on having these kind of discussions with people who see differently than you, finding out about the emotions that motivate your position, finding out about the emotions that motivate the other person's position, maybe asking those questions, find out if you're having a discussion about gun rights or if you're also having a discussion about the government's involvement in our personal lives, and maybe you see that differently. Maybe there's some good reasons they see it differently than you do, and finding out those reasons can be more beneficial in the long run than trying to convince them to see it your way. Would be my takeaway from all this. So,
I love it.
anything you want to add?
Nope. Until next time.
Until next time. Sweet.